Hello, welcome
Oh, yeah.
to the original, the real, the first, the OG Square-based podcast and TV show, live TV production in front of a live studio audience. My name's Rob, and I'm joined by my co-host for all things old world, Mr. Val Heffelfinger. Hello, Val. How are you?
We're back in the saddle again, my dear boy.
Oh boy, which saddle are we in? Are we in an Empire pony? Or are we in a cold one from the Dark Elves? There you go, I'm in world now.
Well, you know what? How about a cold one from the old lizards? Because I did get to play against some stinky lizards, some lizardmen.
Lizardman, Mr. Lizardman.
Lizardmen with piloted by Mr. Peter Colosimo, not a week or so ago while you were at Worlds, and it was wonderful. It was delightful.
So catch me up. You had Peter over. You had a game. How did it go? What happened?
What happened? Okay, come on, brain. I form memories. This happens.
Let's go. We can do this.
I can tell you what happened in these games. Let's see. I was playing with Nurgle Demons because Pete had talked a lot of shit about Nurgle Demons.
Okay.
And everyone else on the internet seems to think they were really good back in the day. So I brought just essentially Nurgle Demons. First game we played, I want to say I won, or was close to winning because everything amazing happened for me. So like, there's a lot of stuff with 8th edition Demons where it just comes down to like, can you roll weird dice rolls? For example, I stuck a double 1 on a combat result, which means I got back all my dead guys, which was a real knife in his heart. There's this chaos table where you have to roll in every magic phase, and like just stupid bullshit happens. Most of it actually bad for demons for some reason. It's good old game design, and unless you roll really high. So I rolled boxcars, which was I get a new unit of demons, and then I rolled boxcars again because it was 2d6 plus 3. So I got 15 demonettes that just appeared behind all of his stinky lizards. That was fantastic. Just everything went great for me. I stuck like a massive long bomb charge to like fly a bunch of flies over something into Teto Echo's unit. Teto Echo's a G. Got him scared. He ran off the board. It was brilliant. I was just complete, just boots down on the ground on Pete. Kicked his butt all the way from the East Coast of Canada.
Go back to the Maritimes. Go back to the Maritimes.
Back to the Maritimes, bye. And then the second game, we got out the big stuff. So I had been pestering Rob for a very long time to send me the final piece of an illicit miniatures deal that we had made last summer. Mm-hmm. An in-kind transaction of goods for goods. And the last piece was a fellow named Tamercon on his toad dragon Bubelos. Bubelos? Bubelos?
Bubelos.
Something like that. Bubelos. Who in a vacuum, well, for one thing, I just assumed this fucking guy was a demon. He's in fact not a demon. He's a Warriors of Chaos guy, so I had to run kind of a fake legal list, but that's fine. So I ran him, and then Pete brought his terrible Dreadsaurian, which is just the prettiest little gigantic lizard. And that game was essentially me being very tired and ADHD'd about playing more fantasy. And I just ran Bubelos into the Dreadsaurian. Dreadsaurian kicked his ass.
As he does.
Pete was like, oh, wait, I can just kill the guy riding the toad. Because like the toad dragon has Tamercon on his back. And so Pete just killed the guy riding the toad dragon. The toad dragon was like, fuck this. Toad dragon got the hell out of there, and I was like, that's good.
It's a good game.
That's GG's. Good game.
I think that's the thing I'm most excited about in Old World is the combined profile, like on like the big guys and the bottom guys, like together combined makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean that's something they do in Warhammer Armies Project because obviously, also they kind of had the idea already, like in 8th edition with Monstrous Cavalry, like, for example. In Nurgle Demons, you have the ability to put your heralds on palanquins, so like big, a piece of plywood with a bunch of Nurglings underneath it. And when you do that, you combine the profile of essentially Nurglings and the Herald, and you get a bunch more wounds and stuff. And so they had that concept. And then later on, when they did the end times, they did combine profiles. So anyway, I don't know why it was so shocking to them that having. And then on top of all of that, they made it so if you were riding a monster and you get hit by something, like say I don't know, a cannonball, both things get hit, which was just like why. There's so many. This, like honestly, like I could fix this. I could fix 8th edition in like 5 rules for Radas. That's a good example of one.
I think a lot of people can. I think that's the tragedy of.
I just don't know how I don't know why it wasn't like the ITC. Like if there was an equivalent of the ITC, which was for those with some reference, the ITC ran obviously events and a ranking ladder. And then they, in 7th edition Warhammer 40k, a little, I guess, 6th edition 40k would have been contemporary to 8th edition fantasy. But they kind of had to, 6th edition was so absolutely terrible, they had to release something called 7th, which was also terrible, but not as terrible. Anyway, but then they didn't give any FAQs or talk about it or erratas or anything. They're just like, here's your game, go fuck yourself. And so Independents had to write FAQs and rules packs to try and make that game work. A lot of them would take whatever the rule was and they wouldn't change it, despite of how absurd the the ramifications of that might be for gameplay. They would just let it be. And then the ITC, however, they did this weird like vote thing where they would vote on rules, and as a result, they kind of like would tone them down and they would actually change rules so that they weren't as stupid, or not stupid, I guess, not as like very, very powerful and strong. They would try and take the edge off of a lot of the most extreme interpretations, whereas a lot of other FAQs, including things like the ETC, which became the WTC, they would often go with sometimes the most extreme interpretation, because that would be what was written. So they would try and go raw first. And anyway, if someone had gone the ITC route with Warhammer Fantasy and we saw stuff sort of had the edge taken off of it, would have been great.
Yeah,
would have been great.
Unfortunately, I could talk about that as well. What's very, very interesting is the internal politics of Games Workshop. So, like anyone in a decision-making capacity in the books and box games part, the rules department is not a 40k player and/or fan, and so they only got like stringent, overbearing control of the fantasy portion of the game. So those individuals that I know, but now because they're a cash cow, you have like you may know the names of people who like worked on the 40k rules like in those times, but they weren't the people who were their managers, and all of their direct line managers were fantasy people. So fantasy had this overarching like grip and stranglehold on it from the like the organizers down into like the local English scene, therefore into the international scene. Whereas 40k they were like fuck off, don't care. Like, and so and so that's why that happened effectively. And then so like, which is quite interesting.
So has there just been like a fantasy sleeper cell just waiting in the dark, like in the lower basements of GWHQ for their moment to come back?
No, because
do another palace coup.
There's not a lot of courage in that room. Let's be real. So they've seen that they've seen that there's a teat somewhere else, and they've run to it, and then they've hired other people who, as we know, are much more concerned. And I mean, Warhammer Fest is the perfect example of, and I'd like to get onto some actual old world stuff now. But Warhammer Fest is kind of the perfect nail in the coffin in that conversation where they're like, it's Warhammer Fest. You're like, cool, what's here? They're like, 40k only. Anything else? Like, not even a whiff. Like, do you know you make other games? I'm not even talking about Age of Sigmar. I'm talking about anything else. They're like, no. One system.
Well, Rob, maybe you're being a little bit just be Comic-Con right now.
Yeah, I am. That's my fault. Just be Comic-Con. Just be Comic-Con. Do better. Right, okay, so to everyone listening, thanks for joining us. If you're watching this on YouTube, listening to the podcast, massive thank you. You can obviously let your friends know that the Square-based podcast and TV show will be live every Thursday on Twitch, and we'll be talking about the old world. That was our intro,
Hell yeah.
me and Val. And we'll be talking to you leading up to the launch of the old world, and we will be reviewing the old world as it comes out. No, then we will be developing community resources like stats. We'll be doing tournament reviews, organizing our own tournaments, building our own international tournament circuit of the old world. Even if the game developers expressly come out and say, we do not want this to be a competitive event game, we will literally co-opt it and rewrite it so it works that way. That's the goal.
That's how the best of it. That's how the best days work, man. That's how it goes.
Yeah,
It's gonna be great. I'm 100% in.
so that's our mission. That's our mission. So should we jump into news? Because there's some hot news. Should old world tournaments be age bracketed?
What does that mean?
I think that means like the OAPs who played Warhammer Fantasy Battle before ostracized out from the newer players so that they don't get. Like, I mean, could you imagine? Like, you turn up, you've been playing Total War on like your PC, or to quote a venerable 40k podcast, your MacBook Pro, and you turn up, and then there's just this old fella, and he's like, "Well, I don't know if you know this, but in 3rd edition, I had a guy, and here he is. He's made of lead. Doctor says I don't have nothing but 2 more years left to live, but this lead mini's all worth it." Do you really want those to interact? Surely separate them out.
And you'll be like, Louise, Jesus, this is a tournament. Yeah, no, I think so. Also, I think those old men are mostly us. We are the old men. So it's all right. I don't need them. I don't know. We don't need to ostracise anybody out of the gates. I think they'll probably ostracize themselves, to be quite frank. People like to select out of things, opt out until they realize or feel like they're good to go. So no, I don't think we need to age or sick. No.
I wouldn't even wear like a Pride T-shirt. I'll just wear like just a rainbow pin. That's what I'll do. Yeah, like that's all I'll do, and stroke it every time before I roll a dice. That's what I'll do. Yeah.
Just a rainbow pin, like an old world rainbow pin. Or are we co-opting the symbolism here?
Oh yeah, we could do that. That sounds great. I'm into that. Right, okay, so jumping into the news, we are obviously recording this in front of a live studio audience if everyone's interested. So join us on every Thursday UK time between 11 and 1 p.m. I'm going to jump into some news. So we've been away for a couple of weeks. I've been at the Age of Sigmar World Championships. Can't wait for the Old World Championships. And then we have seen
to be held at Capital City Bloodbath by a bunch of confused people from Ottawa.
Yeah, I'm in. So we have got some news. So while we're away, we got the Old World Development Diary, the main factions revealed.
Oh my god. This happened while we were off the air?
Yes.
Oh shit.
Yeah.
Oh man. Okay. So all right, let's go.
I'll read through it a bit and catch you up. Right. So with so many distinct armies fighting over the old world, you might be asking which factions will be the ones to feature in the Warhammer Old World. We've seen the noble Paladin and Bretonnian Tomb King, who seems very upset to be awoken, so it's safe to assume that these 2 factions will feature prominently in this new game. But speculate no more. The guys from the Warhammer Design Studio, and I know you have a million things to say that I've just said that, are here with the who's who in the era before the Siege of Prague. Take it away. Now, that might not seem like a lot's been said in that sentence, but actually loads. And I'm no Val's.
This is probably the most consequential release that they've had yet. And they just came out on like a Wednesday afternoon. It's like after Warhammer Fest. Like this is to me like core Warhammer Fest content. No, we're just gonna do it as a blog article. Yeah. And no one's paying any attention during the 40K launch. Awesome. Good work, guys. Anyway, not bitter. Let's keep going.
Well, I just wanted I just wanted to shout out, as you said, that this was all happening before the Siege of Prague. So timeline-wise, like if you go back and listen to the other Square-based shows that we've done,
Yes, true.
This does bring you. This is Val spot on. I do think what we're going to see is that timeline, which as Val said in the previous episodes, is very sketchy. But we definitely are like I don't know if you have watched any Star Wars lore, but they used the they used BBV, I think, the battle like the Battle of Yavin, or BBY. So they're always talking about that's their like Christ moment. It's before and after Yavin.
Yes.
And I think the old world is going to be everything. So it'll be before the battle, the Siege of Prague. So I guess our new old world timeline, if you're interested, from this point on, we'll be describing it as BSG. So before the Siege of Prague, BSG. Before
BSP.
the siege, BSG before the BSP. Sorry, BSP. Before the Siege of Prague.
I would say too that like that the sort of, it is interesting that they have backed the timeline away from the Siege of Prague. They don't ever say exactly how much. They say in the years leading up to. So that's a pretty wide berth. But it does give. But they didn't back it up that far, as we'll discover, for example, with vampires. There's a lot of absurdities that are about to be unfolding in front of us. Let's go.
Okay, so BSP, and also over the last few weeks, we've shown you previews of new models. Shown off freshly painted examples of returning favorites. Don't forget all of those mixed types of armies you can get, which is fun, and reveal many more hints of what you can expect from Warhammer: The Old World. This week, we want to take a look at which factions will feature most prominently in the game. The game will be set firmly within the Old World itself, the lands between the coast of Bretonia to the west and the World's Edge Mountain to the east during the decades immediately before, the decades before the BSP, before the Siege of Prague. So, and against Chaos and the Siege of Prague. Much of the action in the first wave of books and supplements takes place in and around the Border Princes, the barrier lands between the Empire and Orc territory. Accordingly, we'll be focusing on those 9 core factions. Before we talk about the factions, though, then, that does speak to me that they already have a second edition in mind.
Exactly. And
got you after you.
No, I'd say exactly. And I think that paragraph was very glossed over by a lot of people. So, like, we are in the pre-war years, and then people, because the next part, the core faction part, was kind of a bombshell, and wow, lots to talk about. But the fact that this is the first wave of books and supplements, and these are the ones that take place in and around the Border Princes, that explains why, for example, Tomb Kings would be of a higher focus, because obviously that you'd be closer physically to the wastelands where the Tomb Kings come from, and then that gives us our apparently focus on the 9 core factions.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, I think that's quite interesting, because I feel like when we do get into this, is that and obviously we're a little bit late to the news here. I think there's going to be a lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth. But I think that's
indeed there was.
I think that this is going to bring us, not to be too optimistic, this is going to bring us into, this is our first edition, and we're going to get additional, we're going to get into more, and I think that's worth talking about. And I think that literally says that in that sentence, unless I'm over reading those lines. In the first wave of books implies more than one wave. I will note that the Monstrous Arcanum, another book that Rob sent my way, is optimistically titled Book Number 1 in a series that became 1. So one of one. So it can happen that things false start, but anyway. Okay, so
I don't think that's gonna be the case here. I think also, just context wise, we are coming from the Warhammer Total War 3 reality, which is the entire friggin' old world. It didn't start there. This is actually starting very much like Warhammer Total War started, except 10 years later for some reason.
It's literally during the time they didn't produce the minis. It's easily one of the most hilarious moments. They make a game, stop the game, make one of the most successful computer franchises ever, and as it finishes, they're like, "We'll now start that game again."
We will now start the game.
As if that game company didn't have to approach them for the licensing rights every time. on their multi-year development cycle. Doesn't matter. Okay.
It's all right.
Lastly, before we get into the old world factions, I'd just like to point out that they have written that these are core factions.
Yeah.
But previously, there was an alignment chart of I don't know if anyone's got the link of evil and good and evil factions.
Oh, don't spoil. Sorry. I'm on Twitch TV, but you scroll down a little bit there. There's a very important photo that we can talk about for another hour.
Okay, we'll do that in a minute. So they put good and evil, and this kind of caused a bit of internet backlash. And Games Workshop listening but never ever responding changed it to core factions.
No, there used to be two neutral factions, I guess, is the biggest thing. And the two neutral factions were only two of them, and they were the Ogres and they were the Tomb Kings. And then everyone else was either Forces of Order or Destruction. But I guess they didn't. I guess they weren't allowed to use the terms Order and Destruction.
Oh yes, okay, yeah. Well, I think they actually used good and evil, which I think they're on there now. The old
in the old world now, yes.
Yeah, the old world now, and I think some people took offense at something like the Kingdom of Bretonia, which is a monarchist a monarchy with serfdom and pretty aggressive serfdom of that being considered to be good, because we pretty much don't think that those things are good. Well, outside of England, obviously. So, yeah, pretty interesting. And Orcs versus Goblins. Bro, what did they even do? Why are they evil? That's my question.
Read Skarsnik. Read Skarsnik and you'll realize that's very accurate. They're evil bastards.
Okay, so these are the core factions. The Empire of Man. We'll talk about each one in turn. I'll just go through them now. Dwarven Mountain Holds, Kingdom of Bretonia, Wood Elf Realms, the High Elf Realms, Orc and Goblin Tribes, Warriors of Chaos, Beastmen Brayherds, and Tomb Kings of Khemri. Now, Val, if I'm right in thinking, and you can pick one out if you want, some of these are written slightly differently. So it's not just dwarves; it's the Dwarven Mountain Holds. I think that's quite interesting, right?
It is an interesting thing, absolutely. I don't know why it's not just dwarves and dwarven. It could also be dwarven holds. I think mountains would be implied if you know about them. Yeah, I don't know. Do you have any more insight on that? Because yes, that is something that and also Wood Elf Realms and High Elf Realms. They are all a little bit different than they used to be. Maybe this is their attempts to make it more copyrightable. I don't know.
I think it's maybe not even as kind of like legalese as that. I just think creatively they're like, do you know what? Like, because very much like we've seen with Total War has done a much better job than I think probably Games Workshop ever did of really fleshing out those different factions. Like we knew about Imric and we knew about like Calador. And we knew about the Dragon Princes, but like you can legitimately play those as a solo faction pretty much in Total War, and I would say that that's what we're going to see here. I think we will get like a Wood Elf Realms book, but like you see with, like you did see with 40k and like you do see with Age of Sigmar, you might see those like much more divided down. And in fact, I wouldn't be surprised. Let's assume I've been to a coffee shop and read this. I wouldn't be surprised if what you have is a restrictive set of rules inside the Wood Elf or the High Elf realms, where if you're playing as, let's say, Tyrion's faction, there are things that like you'll get, like Swordmasters maybe could become core. As an example. And then if you are like playing as Alarielle, maybe Sisters of the Watch, although the Sisters of Avalon, will become core. Unlocked. So unlocked. So I think we're going to see that, and they'll be a lot more themed. So actually, that's quite exciting because I feel like, and I've just only remembered during this conversation that I had heard that in a coffee shop. So,
well, and that would be a bit of rule fan service. That's a lot of like how the 6th edition lists worked. 6th and maybe early 7th, but mostly 6th. Essentially, there were what were considered to be much more flavorful army builds that you could do based on either a theme or whatever. I think it'd be cool if they came to the conclusion, like for whatever reason, special characters in fantasy and 40k were things that GW produced, did, promoted, made, but either in the rules and I guess elsewhere, kind of discouraged the use of, which is kind of weird to me because I always think like that special characters add to the epic quality of something, and like they also give you a defined element that you can really theme around, right? So by by eighth edition, special characters had kind of come back, but most were really overcosted versus their generic versions, and so like they didn't see a lot of gameplay even there. And it wasn't until the end times again where they opened the game up to allow for characters to come in. I think this had a lot to do with the just design wise, Warhammer. And by the way, if you guys aren't watching Jordan Sorcery right now, there's a guy named Jordan Sorcery on YouTube. He's doing a very, very detailed history of Warhammer Fantasy specifically. I'm sure he'll double back for other games. But right now, he's going through Warhammer Fantasy, and he's just getting to 6th edition. And he had to pause because he caught the attention of like Rick Priestley and Thomas Pirinen, the guys who helped design those games. So it's going to be a really cool explanation of that transition from 5th edition to 6th. But I highly encourage you to watch the content. I did a little bit of a ham-fisted explainer of the history of these games on our first episode. Watch that, and then go watch Jordan Sorcery do it in detail and for real, because they're just really well researched and detailed, awesome explanations of how this stuff came to be. So yeah, anyway, I think to bring it all to a point, in Total War, you have these factions in geographic context, if that makes sense. Like Imrik is such a great example. So like Imrik is a high elf, but he's off, I guess what would that be? India in the real world? Somewhere in that sort of like Bangladesh.
Yeah, but he's near where the Chaos Dwarfs live. He's near where like Skaven are. Like he's separated very quite a lot from Ulthuan, and like all of the forces of like orcs and goblins divided. He's around like the Blasted Lands is where he's roughly at, right? I think.
Yeah, and like but the context of where he is determines sort of like the flavor of like the types of factions he has to conflict with and fight against, like the places that he can go. And so like you get like a really interesting, like it's a very different feel playing high elves in that context versus high elves that are like on Ulthuan and like warring with one another, and maybe sometimes the dark elves come over or like whatever. Like it just gives a very different feel. And so what you're doing here is you're taking these core factions, which are all sort of, organized around that geography of the Border Princes. These are all people who sort of belong around, like these are all factions that sort of belong in that neighborhood. And hopefully you're going to key off of special characters that would also be present in this time in that era. And you kind of ground it. And that's really cool. And then hopefully in future waves, you can take a different area of the map and you can do essentially exactly what Total War has done for 10 years.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, like, if we take High Elves as an example, like because Ulthuan's right near this area, near the Border Princes and stuff. Like you could.
Ulthuan's in the middle of the ocean. And that's why these are like Wood Elf and High Elf realms, right? Like these are just like outposts.
Yeah, exactly. So but what I mean is like you could like introduce a couple of high elf factions or sub factions if you want into this, and then you just release with a couple of characters and hero releases, so you don't have to do. I'm going to release a whole new faction later. You can just be like, we're going to release, like another one of these high elf factions later on down the line. And then, lo and behold, turns out you can sell us those same models you're already selling us for the first faction, for the second faction, but maybe there are some upgrades. Now they
have blue pants.
Yeah, or Forge World, famous for doing a lot of upgrade sets. Sure. Like they'll have some upgrade sets that you can attach onto these things as well, which I think is legitimately like very cool. I'm very excited to read through these. I think they're going to be very fun. I'm really excited about the Dwarven Mountain Holds as well. I think that that's exciting. So the way they're written is really interesting, but also what that means is going to be really fun. And I think maybe a little bit more exciting than I initially thought for me personally. Like seeing this, I was like, do you know what? I definitely can see the individualism that they're going to throw into these factions versus just like generic dwarfs. And you're like, okay, like that would have been a real step backwards. And this feels very positive. I'm very excited about it. I don't know about you.
I'm certainly I'm not crushed. That's for sure. But there is something that was very confusing that we can. If you're ready to transition, like this will probably be the meat of the show.
Oh, the picture below.
The picture below.
Well, I just wanted to talk about because some are missing.
You want to talk? You want to refer to that?
No,
Okay, because I think the picture below hints at the things that are missing.
Yeah. Okay, we'll do that. I just wanted to talk about I'm excited about all of these. Empire of Man, great. Dwarven Mountain Hawks, great. Feels like that definitely should be in there. I think this. We'll move on, but exciting that these are all here. But then obviously there's going to be some real upset that some of the other elements aren't being there. So I'll read through. These armies will have rules published alongside the launch of the old world and will be pivotal players. So that's also pretty important as well, because we're basically hearing about the launch now. The launch will come out. There'll be a launch box, guaranteed. And these will have rules at the same time, like we're seeing with 40k. So that's actually super exciting. So you can run a tournament a couple of weeks into this being out, because there'll be several different factions that are playable. That's 100%. Awesome. Love that.
Yes.
Narrative expansions, and then there's going to be will be pivotal players in the events covered in narrative expansions and supplements. So we know that there's going to be more than one type of book release on top of this as well. Narrative expansions and supplements. So unless they're just using two words. Fantasy's armies can also look forward to some shiny new miniatures that will accompany the return of many classic kits. Okay, right.
So fans of these armies can all look forward to some of the old miniatures and return of classic kits.
Yeah.
So that's actually something about the armies that aren't listed there, that Skaven has been shouted out in chat. Skaven will get PDF rules, so they will have rules, and that doesn't mean they're going to be bad rules either, for the record. There are a lot of armies that have existed in simplified form in Warhammer history that did just fine, except for AOS. The thing is, though, I don't think you get models.
Oh, really? For what for?
For all the guys who aren't on that list.
No. You're only getting models for what's on this list.
That means that you could probably scrounge together based on the AOS range armies for Skaven and whatever, but old models that weren't re-released will not be re-released yet for those guys. Only these guys will have stuff that's re-released. Which is something interesting.
Yeah. I think that is really interesting as well. And I guess maybe there's an entire another show guessing at what we might see come out, which we should maybe do next week, because I think that would be really fun. These armies will have rules published alongside. We've done this already, right? The old world before the Great War Against Chaos. Battles of Warhammer: The Old World take place in the decades immediately before the Siege of Prague. BSP. So, 100 years BSP. At the heart of the old world lies the sprawling empire of man, founded long ago by Sigmar, but long since divided into rival states. West of the empire is the chivalrous realm of Bretonnians throughout the World Edge Mountain. In the east, the Grey Mountains lie between the empire, and Bretonnia is the realm of the dwarfs. In the arboreal gloom of the great forests of Athel Loren, it reside the mysterious wood elves, kin to the seafaring high elves of Ulthuan, who, in their arrogance, maintain many colonies and outposts along the coast of the old world and appoint themselves custodians over the affairs of man. Yet these powerful races and nations do not live alone within the old world, and they must deal with constant evil creatures all across the empire and Bretonnia, savage beastmen, grey herds, and of the sickened woods, and from desolate wilderness and high moors rush the endless hordes of the orc and goblin tribes. From the distant and arid land of the dead come the skeletal legions of the Tomb Kings of Khemri, and the frozen north march the endless hordes of the warriors of chaos. But surrounding all of this is this picture, which Val's got thoughts on.
Innocuous. So this is a very innocuous little picture here.
Is it?
But a few things to point out. OG Citadel trees, fascinating.
Oh, hold on for the podcast listeners. If you want to go into the Warhammer community article, please do. But Val is talking about a bunch of war dancers on square bases for the Wood Elves, lined up against a bunch of I think those are Iron Drakes. But for
good guess. Yeah,
for the Dwarven Holds, I'll make sure I get that right. But there's also a OG Tree Man. So if you've ever collected the current Tree Man from Age of Sigmar, it is a much older Tree Man dating back to, I think, Jesus times.
Well, this is the, I believe, 6th edition Wood Elf Tree Man. There's a Tree Man before this,
When does that date it? When does 6th edition date us as?
I mean, that would put this Tree Man somewhere in the realm of 2003-ish, 2004-ish. As I think Wood Elves didn't immediately drop. These are War Dancers, which are, I think, a 5th edition-ish sculpt. But they never got redone. And those are on them quite distinctly 25 millimeter bases, which means these are updated for the old worlds. These are the War Dancers. And that Tree Man is, by my eyes, sitting on a 50 by 75 millimeter base. That would be a Monsters Cavalry base. I don't think it's on a cab base. And it looks longer than it is wide. So I'm going to say it's Monsters Cab, 50 by 75. Why does this matter? This matters because in 8th edition, when the Wood Elves were released, they were released alongside what today you would find in AOS in the Sylvaneth line. I don't know, is it called a Tree Man? What's it called?
Tree Lord. There's a Tree Lord. There's also a Tree Lord Ancient, and there's, because it's a
Durthu?
and Durthu. Yeah, you can build it 3 different ways.
So that kit was released staunchly within 8th edition Warhammer Fantasy. It was a Warhammer Fantasy kit. It wasn't even an End Times kit. It was Warhammer Fantasy, plastic, glorious looking thing. By the way, this is not a comment on this particular Tree Man. I like this Tree Man a lot. I have a couple of these Tree Men. I think he looks great. I honestly do. I love how...
You need to get some pushback on this.
For a pewter, well, no, I it's a matter of taste. For a pewter mini, I think he's actually pretty dynamic. He's like an animated whirlwind of like tree limbs and logs. Not nearly as cool as the 8th edition Tree Man. However, here we are. We're launching We're launching the new world, the new old world, and instead of the 8th edition Tree Man that's made in plastic and was released for Warhammer Fantasy, we are now looking at a pewter, perhaps, will be metal, most likely, version of the Tree Man from many decades ago at this point. What does it mean?
Okay, all right. Before we can go any further, I need to read out Elric Deutsch's comment in the chat, because I think it's a fair one. He said, I have no idea what they were doing with that Tree Man, as it looks neither like a tree nor like a man.
It's a maelstrom of logs and branches. If you think he looks bad, the Treekin are absolutely horrendous.
They are absolutely horrendous. I saw them once at the LVO where we first met. Someone, even though Treekin, it doesn't matter. There's a long story as to why I ended up seeing Treekin during an Age of Sigmar tournament in Las Vegas, years after they should have been made redundant, and I was like, what the heck? Anyway.
So I want to say, roughly at the same time as this rather innocuous photo of an old Tree Man, which reveals that they have retconned the Tree Man from the Warhammer, the Old World, roughly at the exact same moment in time, and I just want to point this out, we saw an article about Forge World, and they were doing something that they often do, which they were retiring a bunch of 40k units from the game entirely. They were being legended. You can't buy them anymore, including RIP to my custom Stompa. Various kits were just removed from production. And then, in the lead up to the launch of 10th edition 40k coming up, we're just getting to the actual launch, they announced that basically anything from Horus Heresy, and not anything, but almost everything from Horus Heresy that you once could use in both Horus Heresy and Warhammer 40k, so that's like your the Sicarian tanks, like a bunch of different like variants of dreadnoughts, all sorts of stuff. And like specifically Chaos lost a ton of stuff that used to be able to buy from Forge World that also, oddly enough, was never in Horus Heresy. They're just Forge World models. These are all things that will no longer be updated. So they will have rules for 40k, but they will no longer be maintained. They're going to the Legends category, and they will not be legal in any sort of sanctioned or recognized tournament play. So that means that we have an example here of a model that perhaps, I don't know, just speculating here, is considered part of AOS, a core studio game, being removed from the Old World lineup. Just saying, the Tree Man should be, for all intents and purposes, a Wood Elf quality thing. Correct. Being removed because they're now Sylvaneth. And then we have at the exact same time, I don't know if it's related or not, but suddenly the Horus Heresy stuff was being taken out of 40k. This seems like petty bullshit. It looks like I mean, just reading tea leaves here, and I can't drink this tea because I'm not in the coffee shops. But it sure looks like petty bullshit unfolding before our eyes.
Yes.
And I don't know. I don't think anyone else has suggested this yet out there. This might be us making this take for the first time, but it sure looks like whoever
I,
controls one half of this equation was like, you can't use that anymore. And then the other half of the equation was like, well, then you can't use that.
Agreed. Like, I'm with you. So just for clarity for everyone at home who might not be, who some for some reason listens to the show that is one of the most heavily well informed behind the scenes show available on the internet. There are two studios. So the way games get made from Games Workshop. A quick TLDR is they make minis in one place of the building, right? Which is the Citadel Design Studio. So they make minis. Then what they do is they give them to Books and Box Games. Books and Box Games, as I understand it, get very little choice. In fact, even recently I heard of friction. In that they don't get much choice because they don't think some of the things that are coming up are marketable. So they get given to those, and then they design rules, lore, narrative, and a campaign around those things. That's what happens. That's what you think of when you think of 40k and Age of Sigmar and some other stuff. Okay, cool. That's that part of the business. Let's move over to specialist design studios where they have, let's say, a little bit more free form, where they're like, we're going to do Titanicus. And they're like, cool, what's that like? And they all get in a room, they make up some bullshit, they put it together, and then they just release stuff. And then they're like, do they have a roadmap for what they're going to release? Zero fucking chance that's true. Yeah, do they have any, like any idea? Same with kind of the Horus Heresy, which is why, if anyone who's listening has been a long-time Horus Heresy fan, they'll be able to point to the fact that books came out with models in it, with rules for models that never ended up getting made, and then there was models made that weren't inside books, and you can see this repeated again in Necromunda, in Heresy, and everything else. Yeah,
which is the way it was for most of Games Workshop's history, for the record.
It's quite frustrating though, as a process.
I mean, it basically provides opportunity for you to make your own. Like, it's a hobbyist. It's more of a hobbyist. It's the way Games Workshop used to be. Like, when I was a kid, there was all kinds of shit in books, like codexes and army books that weren't actually produced. You had to make yourself. Battle wagons for orcs didn't exist for years and years. But anyway, sorry.
Yeah, so that's the quick TLDR. So that's the two ways in which stuff is made. But unfortunately, sometimes, especially with Age of Sigmar, like Old World being destroyed, Age of Sigmar being created, and then 40k getting that radical change from 7th into 8th edition, there were miniatures that existed in both places. Like you could legitimately collect a Forge World only fantasy Age of Sigmar or 40k army from Forge World and never from Citadel. And then what Val's alluding to, which I think is 100% confirmed pretty much from what we're seeing play out publicly, is a war between those two different studios over different factors. Like, in the most petty and asinine way we've ever seen anything play out, where your very expensive, and also recent war as well, has been pointed out by Circon in the chat. The most recent kind of like cool battle tank that was released for the Horus Heresy, the Kratos, was like, you can also use this in 40k, and people were like, oh my god. And that was only a year ago, and then it got retconned out a year later. That is like, they at least think a couple of years ahead. They're not just selling something to then yank it a year later. So this is a modern falling out, and it looks severe falling out as well.
So this now raises all kinds of questions, because I'm starting now to genuinely wonder if there is going to be a hard cleave between Old World and AOS ranges, because this was hinted at, I think, by some other stuff that, you know, like when we first saw old stuff coming back, right? We were like, what? Especially like, you know, Bretonians, for example, which haven't had a refresh in a long time. And now, now we're seeing a model that was basically new. So like the Wood Elves were the last faction released in Warhammer Fantasy Battles 8th edition. So that is the newest of the new ranges, as far as aside from some very important pieces that came out in the end times. So, are we going to see now anything that went on to become something very important to AOS not be clawed back? And this Warriors of Chaos, for example, are a core faction of Warhammer Fantasy. What version of Warriors of Chaos are we about to see?
Yeah, it's interesting. That is really interesting. Yeah.
Are we going to see old rank and file Chaos Warriors, which, by the way, I think are still for sale? I don't even think they ever did release. Did they ever get around to releasing the new Chaos Warriors?
They've released them now. Yeah, the new Chaos Knights, new Chaos Warriors, new Chaos Chosen.
You can buy as their own kits, not just in one box.
Yeah, as you can buy as their own kits.
So, like, it's fascinating to me to think, like, where does that cleavage end? Because it almost looks like there was a bid, because this is the other very confusing thing, is that on the Horus Heresy side of things, they didn't take all of the units out of 40K. So things like Custodes got to keep their Forge World units, and they will continue to be updated and maintained. The Custodes Knights, the Forge World Big Knights, which recently got a new plastic kit, or will be getting a new plastic kit, will stay eligible for use in 40K. But the vast majority, I would say, 80-90% of it was removed. The things that were in both Horus Heresy and 40K, and also, confusingly, some things that just weren't even in Horus Heresy. They were strictly just made by Forge World. There are some of the oldest Imperial armor units that are available, things like the Brass Scorpion and such. These are not Horus Heresy units. So there's some sort of a bid going on. At the very least, there was some negotiation to keep certain things, if that's indeed what's happening here. But it is so absurd, and it also just makes the what's about to happen with Old World thing very interesting to me, because I don't know if you're excited, but like they announced, for example, Cities of Sigmar will become its own distinct thing, right?
Yes. Yeah. They have to. I mean, a lot of people in the Age of Sigmar community have been expecting the Cities of Sigmar, which is where a huge portion of what were previously a bunch of different factions were coalesced into a single book a few years ago, like 3 years ago. And now you expect huge portions of those to go away. Many of them, in fact. And I think, based on now what we've seen from the Old World previews, we're going to see them all put into the Old World. I wouldn't be surprised if literally nothing. So obviously everything BSP means that probably we don't see steam tanks, probably we don't see a bunch of other bits. So we might see those
steam tanks are firmly in this timeline.
Okay, College of Magic though, no. We might lose like the Luminarch and some of those other bits as well. So they may stay in those Cities of Sigmar stuff. But yeah,
interesting.
Yeah, you're like, I mean, we're only a few months out from that release, or if it's even a few months, it might be less than that. It might be like a month or two. In which case, which I think is quite interesting, that will give us a better indication of what models we'll see where and when. Bringing back that taking a legitimate photo of that old tree man, putting it in a picture as a promo photo is wild to me. Because that looks awful.
Again, I don't hate him, but that I think also something that got pointed out to me when I was going off about this on Facebook was because I was like, there's no example of this ever happening, like them using only like ancient models and like maybe updating a few things, and then like someone like Robert the Bruce's dad in Braveheart, like he's just like leprous face, just like pustules all over himself, and he was like, that's how they do Middle Earth strategy battles. And I was like, and I was like, oh shit, no! And Middle Earth, and he's absolutely right. They just took a game that they they developed and made like a decade or two ago, and they literally release all the same old models. Every now and again, they get like a new rock formation. And that's it. And they just sort of like, they just make it available, which is kind of kind of what a lot of people were confused about with fantasy was when they like scorched the earth. They literally like they could have just kept it there, sort of like, and just like not developed it, just made it like, okay, it's there. If you want it, you can play with it. And that could be what Old World is, but we'll see.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, again, it's the same studio, right? Like, it's the Necromunda studio. It's it's the Was Heresy studio. I think actually not anymore. I think that's not them. I think Forge World is not. Sorry, SDS is not them anymore. But
Not Heresy.
I'm pretty certain not. I think that's Mainline Studio.
Well, then that would completely scuttle our theory then.
The rules,
because
the rules of minis again. There's a differential. So
okay, all right,
but like, I don't know. I'll find out for next week. I'll find out.
Okay, yeah,
Okay.
you go snoop around Inspector Clouseau.
Yeah.
Go eat a croissant very slowly.
I'll just do what I always do. I'll just go into Bugman's on Friday afternoon at 6 p.m. and see people at the bar and be like, "Do you want a pint?" They'll be like, "That's really nice of you, Rob. No problem." I'm like, "That's not a problem. How's things?"
Hey, Rob, I thought you didn't drink. Yeah, that's fine. You want another?
Like, right. Anyway, right. So, reading through this to finish this off.
Yeah.
In Warhammer the Old World, these core factions battle endlessly. Some seek only death and destruction, others seek to reclaim lands they once ruled. Still others seek only to serve their dark masters and overthrow the order imposed upon the world by civilized races of men-dwarf elves, who in turn must march increasingly to war to protect their realms. But what about the other factions? Certain factions people remember from Warhammer Fantasy Battles are not part of the narrative we're telling with the Old World. Ooh. But we will provide with rules for the launch of the game. So those are
just a little square bass, just a hot, quick square bass commentary here.
Yeah, go for it.
Little troubled by seek only to serve their dark masters and overthrow the order imposed on the world by the civilized races of men, dwarves, and elves who are all white. In turn, must.
Hashtag square bast, right? There must be like someone's done the video essay where it's like fantasy is racist end convo. Like someone's got that, and I need that permanently as a button that I can just press, so I don't need to.
Just like, look, eyes open here, guys. Just, but I mean that was a particularly. But so let's put it. What about the other factions? What do we got going on here?
Yeah. And then, so we've got Dark Elves, Skaven, obviously the Dark Elves are the bad guys, Skaven, Vampire Counts, Demons of Chaos, Ogre Kingdoms, Lizard Men, and Chaos Dwarves. Now, Val and the studio audience, Twitch chat and YouTube commenters, how do you feel about those factions not being factions supported? Because there's some big hitters. I would say two of the most unique IPs available to the Old World in Skaven and also Lizard Men.
Yeah.
Not getting support is pretty crazy. What are your thoughts?
The only one, I may have. Am I still audible?
Yeah, we can hear.
Okay, cool. Sorry. The one here that, well, the rationale that they get into about what these guys are up to and why they don't count is particularly frustrating later on. But I guess it hits me as I don't understand. This is the list of armies, I suppose, that have gone on to have successful second lives in AOS, with the exception of Chaos Dwarves, and that's it. Everyone else is very firmly, and Dark Elves. I don't know. Chaos Dwarves and Dark Elves feel very old worldy to me, but Vampire Counts are like a core old world franchise. Like that's what confuses me that they're not there. And Skaven, again, core old world franchise. The other guys I can kind of get because geographically they're not nearby, but like Skaven and Vampire Counts not being on this list is just it's crazy to me.
Yeah, I think that's pretty. I was amazed that Lizardmen aren't there. Lizardmen are literally like a founding race in the Old World lore, so that's weird. Skaven similarly like incredibly integral. Demons of Chaos is like what? Like what? Like they're but Like maybe they're going to be introduced, and this is why I think these are things that we're going to see revisited in like the second edition.
Yes.
Like, I don't think that they're gone.
I would say, though, that with the exception of Dark Elves and Chaos Dwarves, everyone else, to me, feels like ranges that were entirely refreshed or are in the process of being entirely refreshed, probably in some way for AOS. And that, so like, Vampire Counts, for example, has 1-for-1 been almost entirely redone as whatever they are. What are they?
Soulblight Gravelords.
Soulblight Gravelords, thank you. Demons of Chaos, especially all the Slaneshi bits, got broken out into some really cool new stuff. Lizardmen recently got a massive new glow up. I imagine Skaven have got to be in line for They're the
4th edition book. Like they're the bad guys for 4th edition.
So like they are due. So perhaps this list is partially just a matter of logistics. They don't want to commit to doing everything all over at once. And these are also things that are going to be prioritized for release and re-up in AOS first. And then once that wave has passed, well, now you can resell them again to the old world guys. I don't know. Maybe that's what's going on. I have no idea.
Yeah, okay. I'm not sure. I think it's just going to be second edition. I think same as Total War. Like, see how well it does and then release it. Or same as Necromunda. Don't care how it does. Just release whatever you like, whenever you like.
Just keep it going.
Just keep it going. These Legacy Faction Army lists will be made available for free as PDFs of service to fans who have these classic armies on their shelf, so you can still bring them to battle for old time's sake. We don't plan to publish rules for Warhammer Age of Sigmar miniatures, except for those units that were part of the game and setting during the final edition of Warhammer Fantasy Battles. And then what are other armies up to then? During the century before the Siege of Prague, or BSP, the Skaven Under Empire was riven by civil war to the extent that they retreated from the surface world. So they've given some story. So they haven't like... sorry, I'll read through it and then we can talk about it. This
is like very... I wish they had just... This is literally like Poochie went back to his home planet type shit. Like, it's brutal. But anyway, continue.
Yeah, I agree. This origin is believed that Skaven aren't real. They vanished for several generations, became folklore. The Skaven re-emerged only after the Hornrat himself was summoned at the Skaven Blight to end the strife, and instill new purpose to his children. Ties in with the wider rise of chaos and destruction wrought by Asvar Kul, turning them into new power in the world. The Von Carsians were all dead for a given value of dead. After the Vampire Wars, with their defeat, other vampires went into hiding and became less active. Waiting until the world became safe for them to emerge once more. Dark Elves, Lizardmen, Chaos Dwarfs, Ogre Kingdoms were all based far in the old world, and during this period they are very inward-looking and insular races. Chaos Demons have existed in the past and will again, but there is an ebb and flow.
Dark Elves. The race founded on being pirates, corsairs, stealing people from all over the world.
I agree.
Insular race.
I agree. It's some bump, but the important part maybe to talk about is that they've at least like fan service that conversation. It's not they're just like with the Forge stuff for like a lot of 40k stuff. They're like, why is this not in the game? They're like, fuck off. Like, that's their response. Like this is nice enough to write a thing.
I get. You know what? I wasn't expecting that kind of kindness. You know what? You're right. Yeah, that is nice. I personally would have preferred them to just be like, "We'll get to them later." like chill, guys. We'll talk about them later. Rather than like, "Oh, they were busy. Too busy.
Too busy. They just got lots to do."
Walking around the house. You know, like that was I find that a bit much. But anyway, like they will have data, like they will have rules, and that's the most important part. And again, these early rules do not necessarily mean that they're going to be bad rules.
Yes.
Even, you know, like and I think that's what I think a lot of people losing their mind about this need to remember is that there's been like Bretonia survived for 20 years on the same army book. It continues to, and that really, you know, that hung in there. Like Chaos Dwarves until Tamarcon came out were just like a supplemental faction as well. So like people still make do, and you can do stuff with them. And I suspect that we'll get proper rules for these guys in time and models.
Yeah, Me too. I agree with that as well. And like, I think that's going to be a wealth of information to land and be a part of when that does land. Like, that's a huge amount of like units and other stuff to go through for people. But I do recognize that if you do have one of those factions, you're going to feel a bit like, oh, I'm not going to get some updated stuff. That sucks. That's going to feel really bad. So I can.
But at the same time, you probably will, because AOS will be getting like glow ups, right? So like, ironically, a lot of those factions I feel like will have better ranges available to them anyway.
The people complaining about are not people who buy minis and or ever play the game. Like,
yeah, fair.
So
Yeah.
that's not what it is. Their identity is their faction, and yet ever to actually field their faction. So I don't think that's overly a stress. Like, you're not going to say to them, "Oh, so you really like Skaven? So like, you just play him in Age of Sigmar." They'll be like, "No, I wanted to play in Old World." I'll be like, "Have you ever played any fantasy?" They'll be like, "Well, no, but like that's where I would like to play it."
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't think that's overly an issue. Well, pretty exciting wrap up of where we're at the moment.
I'll say
a war between two studios, factions coming back, other factions being sidelined. What an exciting future for the Square-based podcast and also community. If you are a member of the Square-based community, do hashtag Square-based everywhere you can. And also let your old world friends know about the conversations that we'll have here and all of the future resources we're going to develop for our favorite Square-based miniature game.
100%. It's going to be a blast. And also, just to let you know, Rob, you may not be aware, but maybe right now, maybe in the next few minutes, the Warhammer 40k Xeno status slates are going to drop.
Which will be, baby.
Which will include the orcs, which means that, like the groundhog who emerges in Pennsylvania once a year to determine whether or not he is ready to leave his cave and embrace the spring, I will glance over them, grumble, and probably not play 40k. But I look forward to seeing that stuff anyway.
Yeah, me too. It's going to be really fun. Also, and a little side note, we'll talk about this after. Listen, if you enjoyed the show, like, subscribe. The best way to support the show is like, subscribe, and do all those other things. So please do that. Thanks to Val. Thank you to the Twitch chat for a lovely show, and I hope you all enjoyed it. Thank you very much.